The excavator's steel teeth bit into the concrete as Karen Martinez burst through the police line, her manicured hands clawing at Officer Rodriguez's uniform. "Stop them," she shrieked, mascara streaming down her flushed cheeks. "That pool is mine." But as the first chunk of pristine blue tile crashed to the ground, revealing the dark secret buried beneath 15 years of chlorinated lies, Detective Hayes knew this wasn't about property lines anymore. The bones scattered across the exposed earth told a different story, one that would destroy everything Karen had built her perfect life upon. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Willowbrook Estates as Marcus Chen stood at his kitchen window, coffee mug trembling in his hands. Across the fence, Karen Martinez's Olympic-sized swimming pool sparkled like a blue jewel, a constant reminder of the 18 inches of his property she'd stolen. 18 inches that had cost him everything. "Dad, you're shaking again." His daughter Lisa appeared beside him, her nurse's uniform crisp despite the early hour. At 28, she carried the weight of responsibility that should have been his, working double shifts to keep their modest home while he fought a legal battle that had consumed their savings. The survey results came back yesterday, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Confirmed what we knew. That pool, the entire deep end, it's on our land." Lisa's jaw tightened. She'd watched her father deteriorate over the past 2 years since the property dispute began. The man who'd once coached her soccer team and built her treehouse with his own hands had become a hollow shell, crushed under the weight of legal fees and Karen's relentless harassment campaign. What did the lawyer say? "She has 30 days to remove it." Marcus turned from the window, his eyes bright with something Lisa hadn't seen in months: hope. "If she doesn't, we can have it removed ourselves and bill her for the cost." The sound of a slamming door echoed across the yard, followed by the sharp click of designer heels on concrete. Karen Martinez emerged onto her deck like a queen surveying her domain. Even at 45, she maintained the polished perfection of a former beauty queen, platinum blonde hair in perfect waves, athleisure where that cost more than Marcus made in a month, and the kind of aggressive confidence that came from never being told no. She spotted Marcus through the window and raised her phone, snapping a photo with deliberate malice. It was part of her campaign to paint him as a stalker, a bitter neighbor who couldn't accept that successful people deserved nice things. "She's doing it again," Lisa muttered, moving protectively in front of her father. Karen's voice carried across the yard as she spoke into her phone, loud enough to ensure they could hear. "Yes, Detective Morrison? He's watching me again. I feel so unsafe in my own home." Marcus felt his chest tighten. Detective Morrison was Karen's brother-in-law, a fact that had colored every police interaction over the past 2 years. 3 times, officers had appeared at Marcus's door based on Karen's complaints. 3 times, they'd found no evidence of wrongdoing but left him feeling like a criminal in his own home. "I can't take much more of this," Marcus whispered. Lisa wrapped her arm around her father's shoulders. 30 days, Dad. Just 30 more days, and this nightmare is over." But they both knew Karen Martinez didn't surrender anything without a fight. The law office of Patterson and Associates occupied the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian mansion downtown, its wood-paneled walls lined with law books and framed diplomas. Sarah Patterson, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, spread the surveyor's report across her mahogany desk as Marcus and Lisa sat in matching leather chairs. "The evidence is ironclad," Sarah said, pointing to the detailed measurements. "The pool extends 18 inches onto your property along its entire eastern edge. That's approximately 300 square feet of encroachment." Marcus leaned forward, studying the official seal on the document. "And she has to remove it." "By law, yes. I've already served her with notice. She has 30 days to restore your property to its original condition, or you have the right to do it yourself and recover all costs." "How much would that cost?" Lisa asked, though they all knew the answer would be staggering. For a pool that size? Complete removal, excavation, restoration, and landscaping. Sarah consulted her notes. Approximately $40,000. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Even if they won, even if they could legally bill Karen for the costs, they didn't have $40,000 to front. "There is another option," Sarah continued carefully. "A compromise. Mrs. Martinez could purchase the encroached land at fair market value. Given the location and the improvements, we could probably negotiate $15,000. "No." Marcus's voice was firm. That woman has terrorized my family for 2 years. She's called the police on me, spread lies about me to the neighbors, and stolen my property. I won't reward her bad behavior by letting her buy her way out of it." Sarah nodded approvingly. "I hoped you'd say that. Mrs. Martinez has built her entire lifestyle on the assumption that money and connections can solve any problem. It's time someone prove her wrong." As they left the office, Lisa could see the transformation in her father. For the first time in months, he walked with his shoulders back, his stride confident. "We are really going to do this?" she asked as they reached the car. "We are going to do this," Marcus confirmed. "That pool is coming out." Karen Martinez paced the length of her living room like a caged tiger, her phone pressed to her ear. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the pool that had been her pride and joy for 15 years, the centerpiece of countless parties, the backdrop for her daughter's graduation photos, the symbol of everything she'd achieved. Since her divorce. 30 days is ridiculous, Richard, she snapped into the phone. There has to be something you can do. Richard Blackwood, her attorney and the most expensive legal representation money could buy in their mid-sized city, sighed audibly through the speaker. "Karen, I've reviewed the survey 3 times. The pool is on his property. The law is clear." "The law can't be that simple. What about adverse possession? Squatters' rights? I've been using that land for 15 years. Adverse possession requires 20 years in this state, and it has to be hostile use. You had a fence line agreement with the previous owner." Karen stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing. "Then we fight the survey. Hire our own surveyor." "I already did. Same result." "Then we, Karen." Richard's voice carried the patience of a man used to dealing with difficult clients. "Sometimes you have to cut your losses. The encroachment was a mistake, but it's not the end of the world. Remove the pool, build a new one entirely on your property, and move on." The suggestion hit Karen like a physical blow. Remove her pool? Her perfect, custom-designed, architectural masterpiece of a pool? The one that had cost $60,000 and taken 3 months to build? The one that made every other house in the neighborhood look shabby by comparison? "I won't do it," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "Then you'll lose everything. They can have it removed and bill you for the cost. Do you have $40,000 lying around?" Karen's silence was answer enough. Her lifestyle looked expensive, but it was built on credit and alimony payments that would end when her daughter turned 18 next year. The house was mortgaged to the hilt, her credit cards were maxed out, and her jewelry business barely broke even. "There has to be another way," she insisted. "There is. Negotiate. Offer to buy the land." "I tried." Chen refused. "Then make a better offer. Or prepare to say goodbye to your pool." After hanging up, Karen stood alone in her pristine living room, surrounded by the fruits of 15 years of careful social climbing. The designer furniture, the original artwork, the Persian rugs, all of it was window dressing for the real prize, her position as the undisputed queen of Willowbrook Estates. And at the center of it all was her pool. She thought about Marcus Chen, the pathetic little man who dared to challenge her. A maintenance worker at the local high school, driving a 12-year-old Honda, living in a house that desperately needed updates. What right did he have to destroy everything she'd built? Karen pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she needed. "Detective Morrison. It's Karen. I need to see you. Tonight." The Riverside Tavern was the kind of place where off-duty cops went to drink and complain about their jobs. Dim lighting, scarred wooden tables, and a bartender who knew when to listen and when to pretend he hadn't heard anything. Detective Dale Morrison sat in his usual corner booth, nursing his 3rd beer as Karen slid in across from him. At 52, Morrison still carried himself like the high school football star he'd once been, though his once athletic frame had softened into the kind of middle-aged spread that came from too many late nights and not enough exercise. He'd married Karen's sister Emma 15 years ago, back when Karen was just another divorced mom struggling to make ends meet. Watching her transform herself into the neighborhood's social queen had been both impressive and slightly disturbing. "You look stressed," he said, signaling the bartender for another round. "That bastard is trying to destroy me," Karen said without preamble. She'd shed her usual perfect composure, and Morrison could see the desperation beneath. The unmarked sedan had been parked across from Marcus Chen's house for 3 days running. its tinted windows reflecting the morning sun like dead eyes. Lisa noticed it first as she left for work, the same nondescript grey car that had been there. When she returned home each night. "Dad, we need to talk," she said, finding Marcus hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table, surrounded by printouts of city ordinances and property law statutes. "I'm researching the code violations," he muttered without looking up. "If I can prove they're fraudulent, maybe I can file a harassment complaint against. There's a cop car watching our house." Marcus's fingers froze over the keyboard. Slowly, he lifted his head and followed Lisa's gaze toward the front window. The sedan sat in the same spot it had occupied for days, positioned for optimal surveillance of their property. "Are you sure it's police?" "Dad, I work with cops all the time at the hospital. I know an unmarked car when I see one." Lisa's voice carried the controlled calm she used with panicking patients. "What did you do?" "Nothing." The word came out as a croak. "I haven't done anything." But even as he said it, Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that had plagued him for months. The sleepless nights spent researching property law, the obsessive documentation of every interaction with Karen, the growing stack of legal documents that covered his dining room table like evidence in a murder case. Maybe he was losing his mind. "I need to get to work," Lisa said, but her eyes lingered on her father's haggard appearance. "Promise me you won't do anything stupid." After she left, Marcus sat alone with his paranoia and the weight of constant surveillance. Every trip to the mailbox felt like a performance. Every glance toward Karen's property seemed loaded with criminal intent. He found himself walking differently, talking to himself less, afraid that any behavior might be misinterpreted as threatening. The knock on his door came at exactly 10 a.m. Detective Morrison stood on Marcus's front porch flanked by Officer Rodriguez, a young patrol cop whose hand rested casually on his service weapon. Both men wore the kind of practiced neutral expressions that Marcus had learned to fear over the past 2 years. "Mr. Chen, we'd like to ask you a few questions." Marcus's hands trembled as he opened the door wider. "About what?" "Your neighbor, Mrs. Martinez, has filed another complaint. She says you've been taking photographs of her property, documenting her daily routine, and making threatening phone calls." "That's not true." The words sounded weak even to Marcus's own ears. "I document everything for the legal case, but I don't call her. I don't threaten anyone." Morrison stepped closer, and Marcus caught a whiff of stale coffee and cigarettes. "She showed us photos of you standing in your yard with a camera, pointing it directly at her house." The camera was for the survey markers. "I was documenting the property line." At 6 in the morning. Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Every innocent action had been twisted into something sinister. "I couldn't sleep. I wanted to see the markers in different light conditions for the court case." Officer Rodriguez made a note in his pad. Morrison's eyes never left Marcus's face, studying every micro-expression like a predator sizing up prey. "Mr. Chen, I'm going to be direct with you. Mrs. Martinez is scared. She's a single woman living alone, and she feels like you're watching her, stalking her, building up to something violent. I would never. Your property dispute has consumed your life." Morrison continued, his voice taking on a therapeutic tone that felt more threatening than outright aggression. "You've spent your savings, stressed your family, lost sleep. That kind of pressure can make a man do things he wouldn't normally consider." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Marcus realized with crystal clarity that this wasn't an investigation. It was an intervention designed to break him down. "I want to speak to my lawyer," he said quietly. Morrison smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's your right. But lawyers are expensive, Mr. Chen. And from what I hear, you're already financially stretched pretty thin." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. "Keep pushing, and we'll keep pushing back. Keep fighting, and we'll make your life hell. We'll be keeping an eye on things," Morrison said as they turned to leave. "For everyone's safety." Marcus watched them cross the street to Karen's house, where she waited on her front porch like a queen receiving tribute. The conversation was brief but animated, with Karen gesturing toward Marcus's property while Morrison nodded sympathetically. 20 minutes later, a city inspection van pulled into Marcus's driveway. Tony Castellanos had been a city inspector. For 12 years, long enough to know the difference between legitimate code violations and harassment disguised as bureaucracy. The violations cited on Marcus Chen's property were so minor, so technical, and so selectively enforced that they screamed political motivation. But Tony also knew that Detective Morrison had helped his son avoid jail time on a drug possession charge 2 years ago, and in the complicated ecosystem of municipal politics, favors were currency. Mr. Chen, I'm here about the code violations. Marcus led him around to the backyard, where the disputed fence line created a visible border between his modest landscaping and Karen's elaborate garden paradise. The contrast was stark. Marcus's yard showed the wear of a family struggling financially, while Karen's looked like something from a home and garden magazine. Let's start with the shed, Tony said, pulling out his measuring tape. The shed in question was a simple wooden structure that Marcus had built 5 years ago to store lawn equipment. According to the citation, it was too close to the property line by 6 inches, violating the city's setback requirements. Tony's measurements confirmed what he'd suspected. The shed was exactly where it should be, with 2 feet of clearance to spare. This is correct, he muttered, making notes on his clipboard. What about the deck? Marcus asked hopefully. The deck citation claimed unpermitted construction, but Marcus had kept meticulous records. He produced a folder containing the original permit, inspection certificates, and final approval, all properly filed and approved 8 years ago. Tony felt a familiar sick feeling in his stomach. This wasn't about code enforcement. This was about using his office as a weapon in someone else's war. Mr. Chen, these violations appear to be questionable. Relief flooded Marcus's face. So you'll dismiss them? Tony looked across the fence at Karen Martinez's house, where he could see a figure watching from the living room window. He thought about his son, currently on probation instead of in prison thanks to Detective Morrison's intervention. He thought about his job, his pension, his family security. I need to do a more thorough inspection, he said, hating himself. There might be other issues I need to document. For the next hour, Tony crawled through Marcus's property with a magnifying glass, looking for any violation that might justify the harassment. A loose board on the deck railing, a small section of fence that might be an inch over the height limit, a downspout that directed water toward the neighbor's property. Each discovery was minor, technical, and easily fixed. But together, they created a paper trail that would tie Marcus up in bureaucratic knots for months. I'm required to issue citations for what I found, Tony said, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. How much will the fines be? About $3,000 total. But if you contest them, there will be hearing fees, inspection fees, and legal costs. Marcus felt his world tilting sideways. $3,000 might as well have been $3 million. Between the legal fees for the property dispute and Lisa's reduced hours to help him navigate the bureaucracy, they were already drowning financially. There is one option, Tony continued reluctantly. If you agree to drop your property line dispute, these violations might be overlooked. Administrative discretion. The quid pro quo was so blatant that Marcus almost laughed. Drop your case against Karen Martinez, and your problems disappear. Keep fighting, and we'll bury you in red tape and fines. I need time to think, Marcus said. After Tony left, Marcus sat on his back steps staring at the survey stakes that marked his stolen land. 18 inches of property had become the focal point of a conspiracy that reached into the police department, the city inspector's office, and probably deeper into the municipal government than he could imagine. His phone rang. Sarah Patterson's name appeared on the screen. Marcus, I just got a call from the city attorney's office. They're offering a deal. What kind of deal? Drop the property line case, and all pending code violations disappear. They're also offering to waive the filing fees for your original lawsuit. Marcus closed his eyes. The smart play was obvious. Take the deal, cut his losses, except that sometimes the rich and connected won simply because they could afford to fight dirty. What do you recommend? Sarah's silence stretched long enough that Marcus wondered if the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of experience with a system that was supposed to be just but rarely was. Honestly? Take the deal. This isn't about property lines anymore, Marcus. They're going to destroy you. And Karen gets away with it. Karen gets away with it. Marcus thought about his daughter working double shifts to keep them afloat. He thought about the surveillance car that had become a permanent fixture on his street. He thought about Detective M. His Channel 7 news van arrived at 6 p.m. sharp. Its satellite dish extended like a metallic flower reaching toward the darkening sky. Reporter Jessica Morales stepped out in a crisp navy blazer, her cameraman already shouldering his equipment as neighbors began emerging from their houses like prairie dogs sensing danger. Karen Martinez watched from her living room window, her wine glass forgotten in her trembling hand. This wasn't supposed to happen. Her carefully orchestrated campaign to destroy Marcus Chen was meant to be surgical, invisible, conducted through official channels that left no fingerprints. The presence of media changed everything. Mrs. Martinez. Jessica Morales knocked on Karen's front door with the confident persistence of someone accustomed to getting answers. "I'd like to ask you about the property dispute with your neighbor." Karen composed herself, drawing on 15 years of practice at being the perfect suburban hostess. She opened the door with a smile that had graced a dozen charity event photos. "I'm sorry, but I don't speak to reporters without my attorney present." "We are just looking for your side of the story," Jessica pressed. "Mr. Chen has made some serious allegations about corruption in the city government, police harassment, and manufactured code violations. Don't you want to respond?" The blood drained from Karen's face. Marcus hadn't just called the media, he'd given them everything. The surveillance, the bogus inspections, the coordinated campaign to drive him into bankruptcy. If even half of it could be proven. "No comment," she said, closing the door. But through the window, she watched Jessica Morales cross the street to where Marcus waited in his front yard, looking more animated than he had in months. The camera rolled as he pointed to the survey stakes, gestured toward Karen's pool, and spoke with the passionate intensity of a man who finally had someone willing to listen. Karen's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Morrison. "What the hell did you do?" Across town, Detective Morrison sat in his unmarked car watching the news van through binoculars, his stomach churning with the sick certainty that his career was about to implode. The call from his captain had been brief and brutal. "There's a news crew investigating corruption allegations. Your name came up. Be in my office first thing tomorrow." Morrison had spent 12 years building his reputation as a clean cop in a department that had weathered multiple corruption scandals. The pension he'd counted on, the promotion to lieutenant he'd been promised, the respect he'd earned, all of it was about to evaporate because he'd helped his sister-in-law harass her neighbor. His phone rang. Karen's name appeared on the screen. "Don't answer," his wife Emma said from the passenger seat. She'd insisted on coming when Morrison told her about the news investigation, her maternal instincts warning her that their family was in danger. "I have to. She's your sister." Emma's laugh was bitter. "Karen's not my sister anymore. She's a cancer that's been eating our family alive for 2 years." Morrison answered the call anyway. "Karen, we can't talk right now. They're going to destroy me, Dale. That reporter is digging into everything. The inspections, the police calls, your surveillance reports." "My surveillance reports are legitimate." Chen was exhibiting suspicious behavior. Taking photographs at 6 in the morning? Standing in his own backyard. "Dale, you documented a man living his life and called it stalking." The truth hit Morrison like a physical blow. Karen was right. His reports read like the paranoid ravings of someone looking for crimes that didn't exist. Every innocent action had been twisted into evidence of malicious intent. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "Fix this. Make it go away." "Karen, there's nothing to fix. Either we did our jobs properly, or we didn't. There's no middle ground here." The silence stretched long enough that Morrison wondered if she'd hung up. When Karen finally spoke, her voice carried a cold calculation that made his blood run cold. "Dale, I know things. About you, about other cops, about cases that maybe weren't handled completely by the book. Don't make me use that information." Morrison felt Emma's hand grip his arm. His wife had heard enough to understand that her sister was threatening to destroy her husband's career unless he helped cover up her crimes. "Are you blackmailing me?" "I'm reminding you that family protects family. And if you don't protect me, I can't protect you." Morrison hung up and stared at the news van, knowing that his world was about to collapse either way. If he helped Karen cover up the corruption, he'd be a criminal. If he didn't, she'd destroy him with whatever information. She thought she had. Emma squeezed his hand. What does she know? Morrison thought about the shortcuts he'd taken over the years, the small compromises that seemed harmless at the time. A DUI report that got lost when the drunk driver turned out to be a city councilman's son. Evidence that went missing when it would have embarrassed the mayor's office. The usual accommodations that kept a mid-sized city running smoothly. Nothing technically illegal, but nothing that would survive media scrutiny either. Enough, he said quietly. Marcus Chen stood in his backyard as the camera rolled, pointing to the survey stakes that had become the most expensive 18 inches of property in the city's history. Jessica Morales asked good questions, her journalism training evident in the way she built the narrative piece by piece. So you're saying the pool has been on your property for 15 years, and Mrs. Martinez knew it? The original fence line agreement was with the previous owner, Marcus explained, holding up the yellow documents. When Mrs. Martinez bought the house, she inherited the pool but not the right to use our land. And when you tried to resolve this legally, that's when the harassment started. Police surveillance, bogus code violations, threatening phone calls. It's like the entire city government decided I was the enemy for wanting my property back. Jessica made notes on her tablet. We've confirmed that Detective Morrison, who's been handling your case, is married to Mrs. Martinez's sister. And that Inspector Castellanos, who cited your property for violations, has had his own legal troubles that were resolved with police assistance. Do you think this is a conspiracy? Marcus looked across the fence at Karen's house, where he could see her, shadow moving behind the curtains. I think desperate people do desperate things. And Mrs. Martinez is very desperate to keep that pool. What happens in 26 days when the deadline expires? I have a contractor lined up to remove it. Mrs. Martinez will be billed for the full cost of demolition and restoration. How much will that cost? $43,000. The number seemed to echo in the evening air. Jessica's eyebrows rose slightly. It was the kind of figure that would grab viewers' attention and hold it. And if she can't pay, then she'll have a lien on her house until she can. After the interview, Marcus felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. The truth was finally public, but publicity was a double-edged sword. Karen Martinez had spent 2 years proving she was willing to destroy anyone who threatened her perfect life. Now that the stakes had escalated to potential criminal charges and public humiliation, what would she be willing to do next? His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. The emergency. Meeting convened at 9 p.m. in the back room of Rossetti's Italian restaurant, where the noise from the dining room would mask their conversation. Mayor Patricia Hawkins sat at the head of the table, flanked by Police Chief Robert Nash and City Attorney Michael Brennan. The three most powerful people in the city looked like they'd aged a decade in the past 6 hours. How bad is it? Mayor Hawkins asked without preamble. Chief Nash consulted his notes. Morrison's surveillance reports are questionable at best. 3 separate complaints filed against Chen, all based on legal activities conducted on his own property. The pattern suggests harassment. And the inspections. City Attorney Brennan pulled out a thick folder. Castellanos found violations that technically exist but are never enforced at this level. A loose deck rail, a drainage issue, a fence height discrepancy measured in fractions of inches. It reads like someone looking for excuses to write citations. Mayor Hawkins rubbed her temples. She'd been in office for 8 years, building a reputation as a reformer who'd cleaned up the corruption that had plagued the city for decades. One property dispute was about to undo everything she'd accomplished. What's our exposure? If the media can prove coordination between Martinez, Morrison, and Castellanos, we are looking at potential federal charges, Brennan said grimly. Conspiracy, abuse of power, violation of civil rights under color of law. The FBI loves cases like this. And if we do nothing? Channel 7 airs their story tomorrow night. By Friday, we'll have the State Attorney General's office investigating. And by next week, the feds will be knocking on our door. The silence that followed was broken only by the muffled sounds of dinner conversation from the main restaurant. 3 political careers hung in the balance, destroyed by a woman who couldn't accept that her pool was built on stolen land. We need to get ahead of this, Chief Nash said finally. Morrison needs to be suspended pending investigation. Castellanos too. Full transparency, complete cooperation with any investigation. What about Martinez? Mayor Hawkins asked. What about her? She's a private citizen who may have attempted to corrupt public officials. That's B. The Channel 7 investigative report aired at 11 p.m. on Tuesday night, and by Wednesday morning, Marcus Chen's phone hadn't stopped ringing. Reporters from 3 other stations, 2 newspapers, and a podcast about municipal corruption all wanted. Interviews. The story had legs, a perfect storm of David versus Goliath narrative, government corruption, and the kind of petty neighborhood drama that made viewers feel superior to their own neighbors. Lisa found her father sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his laptop screen where the news story played on repeat. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept, but for the first time in months, his hands weren't shaking. "How do you feel?" she asked, setting a cup of coffee beside him. "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "And relieved. And guilty for feeling relieved." The story had been devastating to Karen Martinez. Hidden camera footage showed her perfect suburban facade, contrasted with recordings of her threats and descriptions of the harassment campaign. Detective Morrison appeared in uniform. His official reports quoted verbatim to show how he'd weaponized police power against an innocent citizen. Inspector Castellanos had refused to comment, but his manufactured violations spoke for themselves. "Dad, look at this." Lisa showed him her phone screen. Karen's house is for sale. The real estate listing had gone live at midnight, a rush job with amateur photos and a price that screamed desperation. Karen Martinez was trying to liquidate her assets and disappear before the legal consequences caught up with her. "She can't sell," Marcus said, reading the listing details. "Not with a pending property dispute and a demolition order. No title company will touch that transaction." Maybe she doesn't know that. Marcus's phone buzzed with a call from Sarah. "Patterson, have you seen the news coverage?" His lawyer asked without preamble. "All of it. What does this mean for our case?" "It means we've already won. The city attorney called this morning. They're dismissing all code violations against you and offering to mediate the property dispute. They want this to disappear." Marcus felt a surge of vindication so powerful it left him dizzy. "What about Karen?" "That's where things get interesting. The FBI contacted my office an hour ago. They're opening a federal investigation into civil rights violations and government corruption. Karen Martinez is about to become the target of a criminal probe." After hanging up, Marcus walked to his back window and stared at the pool that had consumed 2 years of his life. In 3 weeks, it would be gone, reduced to rubble and filled with dirt. Karen's perfect symbol of suburban success would become a scar in the earth, a monument to the price of corruption. But as he watched, something moved in Karen's backyard that made his blood run cold. Viktor Kozlov had learned his trade in places where diplomacy ended and violence began. 10 years in the Russian military, 5 years as a private contractor in conflicts that didn't officially exist, and now 3 years working for clients who needed problems to disappear permanently. At 42, he was stocky, silent, and completely without conscience. Karen Martinez met him in her backyard at dawn, away from the surveillance cameras and prying neighbors who'd made her life hell. She looked like a different person, gone. Was the polished socialite, replaced by a hollow-eyed woman wearing yesterday's clothes and desperation like cheap perfume. "The situation has changed," she said without preamble. "The job we discussed, it needs to happen today." Victor studied her with the detached interest of a mechanic examining a broken engine. Original terms were $25,000 for harassment. Making someone disappear costs more. How much more? $50,000. Cash. Half up front. Karen's hand shook as she pulled out a thick envelope. Her jewelry business had been a front for moving money offshore, and she'd been liquidating assets all night. 25 now, 25 when it's done. Victor counted the bills with mechanical precision. What happened to gradual escalation? Property damage, escalating threats, psychological pressure until he breaks. There's no time. The FBI is investigating. If Chen testifies. She didn't finish the sentence. Federal investigation changes the price. $75,000. Karen's face went white. "I don't have $75,000. "Then you have a problem." For a moment, they stood in silence beside the pool that had started everything. The morning sun turned the water into a mirror that reflected Karen's haunted face and Victor's emotionless stare. "What if it looks like an accident?" Karen asked quietly. "Accidents cost the same as murders. Dead is dead." Karen pulled out her phone and scrolled through her banking app. I can get you 50 now and the rest in 2 days. I'm liquidating everything. Victor considered this. House fire. Electrical malfunction. Very tragic, very believable. But if you don't pay the balance. The threat hung unspoken but clear. Karen Martinez was about to become either a murderer or a victim herself. Do it, she whispered. Marcus was trimming hedges when he noticed the stranger watching him from across the street. The man stood beside a white contractor's van, clipboard in hand, looking like any of the dozen service workers who move through the neighborhood daily. But something about his stillness, his focused attention, triggered every instinct Marcus had developed during 2 years of paranoia. The man made notes on his clipboard, photographed Marcus's house from multiple angles, and spent particular attention on the electrical meter and outdoor outlets. When Marcus moved to get a better look, the stranger climbed into his van and drove away. Lisa arrived home from work to find her father pacing the living room like a caged animal. There was someone watching the house today, he said. Taking pictures, making notes. Did you call the police? Marcus's laugh was bitter. The police? After everything that's happened, you want me to call the same department that's been harassing us for 2 years? Dad, the FBI is investigating now. Detective Morrison has been suspended. Things are different. Are they? Or is this just the next phase of Karen's campaign? Lisa sat beside her father and took his hands in hers. You're safe now. The whole world is watching. Karen can't touch you without destroying herself. But as the afternoon wore on, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being hunted. Every car that passed too slowly, every delivery truck that lingered too long, every neighbor who looked in their direction felt like a threat. At 6 p.m., his paranoia proved justified. The electrical fire started in the basement, where old wiring met new connections in a cascade of sparks and smoke. By the time Marcus smelled burning plastic, flames were already licking at the floor joists. Above his head. Lisa, he screamed, running for the stairs. His daughter was in the shower, deaf to his calls over the sound of running water. Marcus charged up the stairs 2 at a time, his lungs burning from smoke inhalation. The fire was spreading faster than should have been possible, as if it had been designed to consume the house with maximum efficiency. He burst into the bathroom. Just as Lisa emerged from a shower, confusion turning to terror as she saw the smoke pouring under the door. Fire! We have to get out now. They ran through the hallway as the lights flickered and died, plunging them into a hellscape of smoke and orange light. The front door was blocked by flames, forcing them toward the back of the house where Marcus's paranoia had prepared an escape route. He kicked out the bedroom window and helped Lisa climb through onto the roof of the back porch. As they dropped to the ground, Marcus looked back to see his home, the house where he'd raised his daughter, where his wife had died, where 2 years of legal documents were stored, disappearing into an inferno. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk. As fire trucks arrived, their sirens wailing like mourners at a funeral. Marcus and Lisa stood wrapped in blankets provided by paramedics, watching 20 years of their lives turn to ash. Sir. Fire Chief Rodriguez approached them with the careful manner of someone delivering bad news. The preliminary investigation suggests electrical malfunction, but there are some irregularities. What kind of irregularities? The fire started in multiple locations simultaneously. That's unusual for an electrical fire. We'll know more after the full investigation. Marcus looked across the street to where Karen Martinez stood in her front yard, a silhouette against the flames. Even from a distance, he could see her satisfied smile. It wasn't an accident, he said quietly. Chief Rodriguez followed his gaze. Sir, I understand you're upset, but we can't make accusations without evidence. She hired someone to burn down my house. Mr. Chen, I know about your dispute with Mrs. Martinez, but arson is a serious charge. If you have evidence, the evidence just burned up, Marcus said, watching the last of his roof collapse in a shower of sparks. As the firefighters continued their work, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Jessica Morales, the Channel 7 reporter who'd exposed the corruption scandal. Mr. Chen, I'm sorry about your house. Can you tell me what happened? Marcus looked at the smoking ruins of his home, then at Karen Martinez still watching from across the street. Someone tried to kill me and my daughter, and I know exactly who ordered it. The words carried across the crowd of neighbors and emergency responders, reaching Karen's ears like an accusation from beyond the grave. for the first time since. This all began, her perfect mask slipped, revealing the terrified criminal beneath. But as Marcus spoke to the FBI field office in downtown occupied 4 floors of a glass tower that reflected the morning sky like a mirror of justice. Agent Sarah Caldwell had seen enough corruption cases to recognize the pattern, small-town officials thinking they were untouchable until federal attention turned their world upside down. But the Chen case was different. Attempted murder elevated everything from municipal corruption to federal terrorism charges. Marcus sat across from her in interview room 3, flanked by Lisa and their new attorney, a federal prosecutor-turned-defense lawyer who specialized in witness protection cases. The house fire had left them with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a story that sounded like paranoid delusion until you examined the evidence. "Mr. Chen, walk me through the events leading up to the fire," Agent Caldwell said, her recorder capturing every word. "Someone was watching the house all day, taking pictures, making notes about our electrical systems. When I tried to get a closer look, he drove away in a white contractor's van." "Did you get a license plate?" "Partial. Victor, something with a K. The first 3 letters were VRK." Agent Caldwell made notes. Her team had already pulled traffic, camera footage from the neighborhood, and they'd identified the van, registered to a shell company that led back to Victor Kozlov, a man with an interesting military background and no official employment records. "The fire inspector found accelerant residue in your basement," she continued. "Someone poured gasoline around your electrical panel and ignited it to make the fire look accidental." Lisa gripped her father's hand. "Karen Martinez hired someone to kill us. That's what we are trying to prove. But Mrs. Martinez is claiming she knows nothing about any fire. She says she was home all evening with her daughter, who corroborates her alibi." Marcus laughed bitterly. Of course her daughter covers for her. What 16-year-old is going to admit her mother is a would-be murderer? Agent Caldwell studied the man across from her. 2 weeks ago, Marcus Chen had been a broken maintenance worker fighting a hopeless legal battle. The house fire had burned away his fear, leaving behind something harder and more dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose. "Mr. Chen, we are going to need you to wear a wire." The temporary shelter at St. Mary's Catholic Church smelled of industrial disinfectant and decades of human desperation. Marcus and Lisa had been assigned a small room with 2 cots, a shared bathroom down the hall, and the kind of crushing dignity that came with losing everything in a single night. But the room also came with something Marcus hadn't expected: clarity. Stripped of his house, his possessions, and his illusions about justice, Marcus finally understood what he was fighting for. Not 18 inches of property. Not money or principle or even revenge. He was fighting for the right to exist without fear, to live in a world where predators like Karen Martinez couldn't destroy innocent people simply because they had the connections and money to weaponize the system. "The FBI wants me to get Karen to confess," he told Lisa as they sat on their cots eating dinner from paper plates provided by the church volunteers. "That sounds dangerous." "Everything's dangerous now. She hired a professional killer, Lisa. He's not going to stop because the house fire failed." Lisa thought about Victor Kozlov, the man Agent Caldwell had described in clinical terms that failed to capture the horror of what he represented. A ghost who moved through the world leaving no traces except bodies and grieving families. What if something goes wrong? What if he's watching when you meet with Karen? Marcus pulled out the wire the FBI had given him, a device so small it looked like a button on his shirt. "Then at least there will be evidence. At least someone will know the truth." That night, as Lisa slept fitfully on the cot beside him, Marcus stared at the ceiling and planned his final gambit. Karen Martinez had spent 2 years proving she would destroy anyone who threatened her perfect life. Tomorrow, he would give her the chance to prove it one last time, with federal agents listening to every word. The meeting was set for noon. At Riverside Park, the same location where Marcus used to take Lisa when she was young. The irony wasn't lost on him. A place of childhood innocence transformed into the site of what might be his final confrontation. Karen arrived 15 minutes early, parking her Mercedes in the shade of an oak tree that had stood since before the neighborhood was built. She looked like she'd aged a decade in 2 weeks, her perfect blonde hair showing dark roots, her designer clothes wrinkled, her makeup unable to hide the dark circles under her eyes. Marcus approached from the walking path, his phone recording openly as insurance in case the wire failed. Karen saw him coming and stood beside her car like a gunfighter preparing for a showdown. "You wanted to talk," she said without preamble. "Talk. I want to offer you a deal." Karen's laugh was bitter. "What could you possibly offer me? You're homeless, broke, and under federal investigation for making false accusations. I'm offering you a way out of this mess before it destroys both of us." For the first time since he'd known her, Marcus saw genuine curiosity in Karen's eyes. The federal investigation had been closing around her like a noose, and desperate. People were always willing to listen to desperate solutions. What kind of deal? "I drop all charges. The property dispute, the corruption investigation, everything. In exchange, you pay for rebuilding my house and we both walk away." "That's insane. Why would you give up now when you're winning?" Marcus stepped closer, close enough that the wire would pick up every word clearly. "Because I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of watching my daughter work herself to death paying for my obsession. Tired of living in fear that some maniac is going to try to kill us again." The words hit Karen like physical blows. Marcus was offering her everything she wanted: complete victory, total vindication, a return to her perfect life, and he was doing it from a position of strength. It was the kind of psychological manipulation that Karen herself had perfected, turned back against her with surgical precision. "How do I know you won't change your mind?" "Because I'm not you," Marcus said quietly. "When I give my word, it means something." Karen circled her car like a caged animal, her mind racing through the implications. If Marcus dropped the charges, the FBI investigation would collapse. The media attention would fade. She could rebuild her reputation, maybe even stay in the house if she could refinance quickly enough. "What about the fire?" she asked. "The FBI thinks I hired someone to burn down your house." "Did you?" The question hung in the air between them like a loaded gun. Karen looked around the empty park, confirming they were alone, and for a moment Marcus thought she might actually confess. "That fire was an accident," she said finally. "Old wiring in an old house. It happens all the time." "Of course it was," Marcus agreed. "Just like all those code violations were legitimate, and Detective Morrison's surveillance was justified, and Inspector Castellano's just happened to find problems that had been overlooked for 8 years. Karen's eyes narrowed. "What are you really after, Marcus?" "I'm after the truth. About the fire, about Victor Kozlov, about how far you were willing to go to keep that pool." The name Victor Kozlov hit Karen like a slap. Her perfect mask slipped completely, revealing the terrified criminal beneath. "I don't know anyone named Victor Kozlov." "Then you won't mind if the FBI searches your phone records, your bank statements, your email accounts. You won't mind if they interview every contractor who's worked on your house in the past month." Karen was trapped, and they both knew it. The federal investigation was closing in from all sides, and Marcus's offer of a deal was really an ultimatum: confess now and maybe cut a deal with the prosecutors, or maintain the lie and face the full weight of federal terrorism charges. "You're wearing a wire," she said suddenly. "Of course I am. This entire conversation is being recorded by federal agents." Karen looked around the park with new eyes, spotting the unmarked vans positioned at strategic points, the joggers who moved with military precision, the maintenance workers who were too well dressed for their jobs. "You set me up. You set yourself up the moment you decided that pool was worth more than human life." Karen pulled out her phone, and for a moment Marcus thought she was going to call her lawyer. Instead, she scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she needed. "Victor? It's Karen. We have a problem." Marcus's blood turned to ice as he realized what was happening. Karen wasn't confessing. She was activating her killer for a second attempt. "He's here," she continued into the phone. "Riverside Park. Both of them." Agent Caldwell's voice crackled through Marcus's earpiece. "Get down. Sniper." The first shot shattered Karen's windshield. The second punched through the oak tree where Marcus had been standing a split second earlier. As federal agents swarmed, the park and Karen Martinez screamed denials into her phone. Marcus realized that the war for 18 inches of property had finally reached its bloody conclusion. But Victor Kozlov was still out there somewhere, and his contract wasn't finished. Until both Marcus and Lisa Chen were dead. The pool demolition was scheduled for tomorrow morning, and Karen Martinez had just ensured that she would watch it from a federal holding cell, if she survived the next 24 hours. 0 days remaining. The excavator was coming, and with it, the final revelation that would expose the true Ree.